Hello, Robs. We're back with Trousered Apes, Sick Literature and a Sick Society by Duncan Williams. Chapter 5, we continue with the second half of this chapter. How accurate a representation of the Harvard aesthete, how do you say that? Aesthetes. This is, I am not in a position to assess. It is, however, an almost perfect description of the Raskolnikovian attitude to art and society. Taking Colley's propositions one by one, the following deductions may be made. The Raskolnikovian is dedicated to selfish self-fulfillment. Cf. Mahler's statement that whether the life is criminal or not, the decision is to develop the psychopath in oneself. Or Jimmy Porter's, I don't care if she's going to have a baby, I don't care if it has two heads, etc. In order to be successful, he must outshock his competitors. Cf. Jari, Osborne, Genet, Picasso, Albee, et al. He is contemptuous of society from which he feels alienated and towards which he exhibits an arrogant disdain. This includes almost the whole avant-garde literary movement. What seems to be ignored by such intellectuals is that the possession of intelligence per se is no more cause for pride than physical endowments like brown eyes or fair hair. It is the direction in which our intellect is exerted that ought to count. History records endless examples of the evil and destruction wrought by brilliant, unscrupulous knaves and by those who prostituted their talents to serve purely selfish ends. He must always be obscure. To be easily understood by the masses is to court disaster and earn contemptuous dismissal from Raskolnikovian circles. If I am accused of misrepresenting the motives of modern writers, I would reply that their motives are unimportant when compared to the effect of their work, and if a man deliberately courts obscurity, he must expect to be imperfectly understood. This effect has led to the fragmentation of society, the withdrawal of mimesis to which Toynbee refers, and the loss of unity of culture which Yeats deplored. I've got to say that the citing of just numerous random, I guess not random, but pointed quotes by different authors is kind of annoying. In order to achieve self-fulfillment or self-actualization, no limit is set upon his behavior. The sadomasochistic element is apparent in such phrases as he triumphs over the world, the poet's revenge on society, and the inclusion of madness and suicide among the permissible means of achieving ecstasy. From the foregoing, one dominant fact emerges. The Raskolnikovian temper is destructive, both of self and society. In this respect, it is an unthinkable epithet to apply to the majority of the great writers of the past. Blake is perhaps the first major writer to exhibit some, though by no means all, of the traits enumerated above, and even today, there are one or two authors eminent enough to see through the modishness and selfish unconcern for humanity which are exhibited by the Raskolnikovians. Saul Bellow, for example, on the occasion of an award for Herzog, made it quite explicit that to regard alienation as the sole characteristic of modern man's dilemma and to insist on regarding modern society as frightful, brutal, hostile to whatever is pure in the human spirit is to be guilty of distortion and unnecessary pessimism. Of prime importance is the fact that the characteristics I have used to define the Raskolnikovian are found not only in a description of the Harvard aesthetes between 1912 and 1919, but are present to a greater or lesser extent in Dostoevsky's protagonist in Crime and Punishment, which was completed in December 1866. The modern Raskolnikovian tends to justify his social and artistic attitudes by referring to the social and moral disintegration of two world wars, the impending horrors of atomic warfare, the dehumanizing effects of automation and a computerized society. But the Raskolnikovian mentality antedates all these pretexts by at least a century, just as I have stated that the cumulative effect of Lyell, Darwin, Freud, and others does not wholly account for the contemporary lack of religious faith. So I would suggest that world wars, the bomb, and automation are being used, partially at least, as excuses for what in fact is self-indulgence. The unselfish, cultivated mind attempts to cope with problems in a practical fashion, as in Dryden's Absalom and Achitophel. Don't know that one. By directing his satire at the English people's restless and fruitless quest for a perfect ruler and a perfect religion. God's pampered people, whom debauched with ease no king could govern, nor no God could please, and at the demagogic nature of the Earl of Shaftesbury's activities against Charles II, the poem undoubtedly helped to avert the miseries of a second civil war. In a modern context, one might opine that Orwell's 1984, written in clear and forceful prose, has done more to alert 20th century man to the impending perils of the technological age than all the obscure, self-pitying poems on the subject. Evil, wrote Thomas Hood, is wrought by want of thought, as well as want of heart, but the Raskolnikovian displays a want of both qualities. Selfishness implies heartlessness, and the hatred and detestation of rationalism precludes thought. This does not mean that there is no room for emotion in human life, or that there is no validity in Pascal's statement that the heart has its reasons which reason knows nothing of, but to assume the emotion is all that is needed. To cultivate it exclusively by any means in one's power, including drugs, suicide, and even murder, to deliberately develop the psychopath in oneself, and to hold reason and the rational processes in contempt, is to descend to the level of the Yahoo or Trousered Ape. In his book, A Sign for Cain, the psychologist Frederick Wortham has the following observation on Norman Mailer's An American Dream. A man's murder of his wife is presented as a positive act in the development of his personality, as a liberation, a catharsis. After the murder, illness passes away from the murderer. This strikes one as a misunderstanding of psychotherapeutic principles. Murder as therapy is also evident in a number of contemporary plays, e.g., Arthur Adamov's Les Scènes de la Marche. No work in literature has been so consistently misconstrued as the final book of Gulliver's Travels. In fact, Swift is satirizing Gulliver's exaggerated respect for the how the hell you say that? The Houyhnhnms, who symbolize abstract reason divorced from feeling. Gulliver, in his vain pride, attempts to become a hoy-ho-hey-ho, and in doing, loses his compassion for his own species. On his return home, he is depicted as unable to stand the sight and smell of his wife and children, finding solace only in the company of his horses. A man alienated from society and mentally deranged. The moral is obvious. Man should neither aspire to be a god nor descend to the level of the brute. This is the dominant theme of Pope's Essay on Man and countless other poems, novels, sermons, and philosophical treatises of the period. And until we rediscover a working balance between rationalism and emotionalism, the Raskolnikovian destructive element will continue to dominate our literature and art. Writing of the French critic Antonin Artaud, how do you say that, Artaud? George Walworth, after pointing out that Artaud, formulated into a dramatic theory what Jerry had expressed intuitively, writes, the mere existence of a figure like Ubu, whose heedless freedom makes civilized behavior look ridiculous is a protest in itself. But surely one is at liberty to question this statement. Does Ubu's heedless freedom expressed in greed, cruelty, and an obsession with the animalistic in reality make civilized behavior look ridiculous? Or is one being impossibly naive in thinking the converse to be true? To assent to Walworth's proposition is to invert all values, to infer that greed, cruelty, and an obsession with the animalistic are not ridiculous, and implicitly that they are better than altruism, mercy, and the suppression of one's animal instincts. Artaud's theories are essentially yet another repudiation of civilization. They are based upon the assumption that men are naturally barbaric and that culture has corrupted them. Wellworth wrote, only the instinctive desires, anger, hate, longing, the physical desires, etc., are worthy of consideration by the artist. Camus, however, came to realize that the nihilism and consequent moral vacuum caused by such theories lead to Nazism, communism, and other forms of human tyranny. Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, suggests that the sadomasochistic mind springs from the inability to bear the isolation and weakness of one's own self. He goes on to term the sadomasochist the authoritarian character, and says that it represents the personality structure which is the human basis of fascism, and presumably any other form of authoritarianism. Far from giving man freedom, such unbridled license eventually leads to both self-enslavement and political bondage. It is precisely because Freud reached this conclusion that the loss of gratification and of sexual freedom is compensated for by the advantages of civilized life that he has been rejected or ignored by so many contemporary writers and artists. As Leslie Fiedler expresses it, Freud has come to seem too timid, too puritanical, and above all, too rational for the second half of the 20th century. It is William Reich who moves the young with his antinomianism, his taste for magic, and his emphasis on full genitality as the final goal of man. In view of what I have already written, any comment on this quotation would be superfluous. I shall leave the reader the task of speculating upon Samuel Johnson's reaction to the concept of full geniality as the final goal of man. And again, I butchered that, but I don't care. I don't even know what the hell this book's talking about at this point. Except to say that all these writers are wrong, and he's right. I don't really disagree with him, but, I mean, come on, buddy. Goodbye.